Racist cop assaults black man, but discovers he's his boss. What would you do if you witnessed an act of injustice so brutal that it shook your faith in humanity? New York City, a vibrant and diverse metropolis, hid within its bustling streets a story of prejudice and redemption about to unfold. It was a typical Monday, February 24th, 2025, when fate decided to intertwine the lives of two men in an unexpected way. Before we continue, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to never miss an emotional story like this one. And in the comments, tell us which city you're watching from. Officer Jack Thompson, a 35-year-old policeman known for his rigid attitude and, unfortunately, his veiled prejudices, was patrolling the streets of downtown Manhattan. His scrutinizing gaze scanned the crowded sidewalks until his eyes fixed on Marcus Johnson, a 45-year-old black man in an impeccable suit, walking briskly towards an office building. What happened next shocked everyone present. Jack, driven by his deep-seated prejudices, aggressively approached Marcus, unjustly accusing him of suspicious activity. The officer's harsh words echoed down the street, drawing the attention of passers-by who watched in horror as the scene of explicit discrimination unfolded before their eyes. Marcus, maintaining admirable dignity in the face of this humiliating situation, tried to explain that he was, in fact, the new commissioner of the NYPD about to take office that morning. But Jack, blinded by his prejudices, ignored the explanations and continued his aggressive approach. Tension rose with each passing second, and the confrontation seemed on the verge of escalating. People around began filming the scene with their smartphones, while others shouted at the officer to stop this injustice. At that moment, something unexpected happened. An official NYPD vehicle abruptly pulled up beside them, and the current commissioner, about to retire, stepped out. With an expression of shock and disappointment, he quickly approached. What happened next would forever change the lives of Jack and Marcus, as well as the dynamics of the New York Police Department. The consequences of this fateful encounter would reverberate throughout the city, triggering a series of events that no one could have foreseen. Would justice prevail in this case of flagrant discrimination, or would old habits and power structures once again protect those who abuse their authority? As the confrontation unfolded, a crowd began to gather. Smartphones were raised, capturing every moment of the tense exchange. The air was thick with anticipation and anger. "Officer Thompson," the retiring commissioner's voice cut through the chaos. "Stand down immediately." Jack froze, his hand still gripping Marcus's arm. Slowly, realization dawned on his face as he took in the scene: his boss, the man he was manhandling, and the sea of disapproving faces surrounding them. Marcus straightened his jacket, his eyes never leaving Jack's face. "I believe we have much to discuss, Officer Thompson," he said, his voice calm but laden with authority. The retiring commissioner, sensing the volatile situation, quickly took charge. "We'll handle this at headquarters," he said, gesturing towards the official vehicle. As the three men moved towards the car, the scene around them came to life. Street vendors whispered among themselves, executives with their earbuds paused to observe, and even the usually hurried bike messengers slowed down to catch a glimpse of the unfolding drama. Inside the car, the silence was deafening. Jack, seated in the back, felt the weight of his actions settling in his chest. His hands, once firm on his baton, now trembled slightly. Marcus, in the passenger seat, remained silent, his mind already calculating the implications of this incident for his new position and for the NYPD as a whole. As they drove away, the crowd began to disperse, but the ripples of what had just occurred would soon spread far beyond this Manhattan street corner. New York City was about to face a reckoning, and the NYPD would never be the same. The scorching New York sun seemed to intensify the palpable tension in the unfolding scene. Marcus Johnson, his once immaculate navy suit now wrinkled from the aggressive approach, stood tall, his steady, determined gaze contrasting with the expression of shock and shame beginning to form on Officer Jack Thompson's face. The retiring commissioner, Robert Sullivan, a man in his 60s with graying hair and tired eyes that had witnessed decades of service in the NYPD, stepped between the two. "Jack, let him go immediately," he ordered, his deep, authoritative voice cutting through the air like a razor. Jack, suddenly aware of the gravity of his action, loosened his grip on Marcus's arm. The noise from the crowd around, a mix of filming smartphones and indignant voices, created an incessant buzz that seemed to amplify the tension of the moment. Marcus adjusted his jacket with dignity, his dark brown eyes fixed on Jack. "I believe we have a lot to discuss, Officer Thompson," he said, his voice calm but charged with an authority that made Jack swallow hard. Robert, sensing the growing crowd and the curious onlookers, quickly took control of the situation. "We'll sort this out at headquarters," he said, gesturing towards the official vehicle. As the three men headed towards the vehicle, the scene around them came to life. Street vendors whispered among themselves, suited executives with their earbuds stopped to observe, and even the usually hurried bike messengers slowed down to capture a glimpse of the drama unfolding. On the ride to the NYPD headquarters, the silence inside the car was deafening. Jack, seated in the back, felt the weight of his actions accumulating in his chest. His hands, previously firm on his baton, now trembled slightly. Marcus, in the passenger seat, remained silent, his mind already calculating the implications of this incident for his new position and for the NYPD as a whole. Robert, at the wheel, cast worried glances in the rearview mirror. He had known Jack since he was a young recruit at the police academy. He had always seen potential in the young officer, but had also noticed his problematic tendencies. Now, facing his last day before retirement, Robert wondered where he had failed in shaping the character of men like Jack. Arriving at the headquarters, the usual buzz of the place was replaced by a tense silence as the three entered. Curious glances and whispers followed them to the commissioner's office. Once in the office, Robert closed the door and turned to face the two men. Marcus, with surprising calmness, was the first to speak. "I believe we have a delicate situation on our hands, gentlemen." Jack, still stunned by the revelation and the magnitude of his error, tried to explain. "Sir, I didn't know. It was a misunderstanding." Marcus raised a hand, silencing him. "Officer Thompson, there is no misunderstanding here. What happened today is a clear example of the kind of prejudice many face daily. The only difference is that today you chose the wrong person to discriminate against." Robert, feeling the weight of his final hours as commissioner, intervened. "Jack, do you understand the gravity of what you've done? Not only have you violated a citizen's rights, but you've also tarnished the reputation of this institution." Jack's face alternated between shame and fear. His career, which he had built over the years, was now at stake. I apologize. I don't know what to say." Marcus stood up, adjusting his suit. "Apologies are not enough, Officer Thompson. What happened today is symptomatic of a larger problem, and as the new commissioner, I intend to address it head-on." The atmosphere in the room grew heavier with these words. Jack felt a chill down his spine, realizing his life was about to change radically. Robert, meanwhile, saw in this situation an opportunity for the kind of change he had always wished to implement, but never had the courage or support to do. Marcus walked to the window, observing the city that was now under his responsibility. "Gentlemen," he said, turning to face the two officers, "what happens from now on will not only affect our lives, but potentially the future of this entire institution." The tension in the room was palpable. Jack's career hung in the balance, while Marcus faced the challenge of turning this incident into a catalyst for change. Robert, in his final moments as commissioner, felt the weight of his legacy and the responsibility to ensure a smooth transition. As the sun began to set over the New York skyline, casting long shadows across the office, the three men stood at a crossroads. The decisions made in this room would not only shape their individual futures, but could potentially transform the entire NYPD and its relationship with the community it served. The stage was set for a confrontation between old prejudices and new visions, between resistance to change and the pressing need for reform. The future of policing in New York City hung in the balance. In the days following the incident, tension at the NYPD headquarters was palpable. News of the confrontation between Jack and Marcus spread quickly, creating clear divisions among the officers. Some defended Jack, arguing he was just doing his job, while others recognized the gravity of his actions and supported severe disciplinary measures. Marcus Johnson, now officially sworn in as the new NYPD commissioner, faced his first major challenge. He knew that his response to this incident would set the tone for his administration and could potentially change the culture of the institution. On a particularly tense morning, Marcus called a meeting with all senior officers. The conference room was packed, the air heavy with anxiety and speculation. Marcus entered, his serious face contrasting with the calm of his voice as he began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing a critical moment," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "Last week's incident is not just about one officer or a poorly conducted stop. It's a symptom of a much larger problem that permeates our society and, unfortunately, our institution." A murmur ran through the room. Marcus continued, "Starting today, we will implement a comprehensive training program on diversity and de-escalation techniques. Every officer, regardless of rank or seniority, will undergo this training." The reaction was immediate. Some officers showed open support, while others exchanged skeptical glances. A veteran captain, Frank Miller, known for his conservative stance, stood up. "With all due respect, Commissioner," he began, barely concealing his disdain, "our men don't have time to waste on politically correct training. We have a city to protect." Marcus kept his cool, but his voice took on a steely tone. "Captain, protecting the city means protecting all its citizens, not just those who look like us. This training is not optional, it's essential." The tension in the room increased. Other officers began to express their opinions, some supporting Marcus, others resisting change. The discussion flared up, voices rising and arguments becoming more passionate. Meanwhile, in another part of the headquarters, Jack Thompson faced his own torment. Suspended from duty while an internal investigation was conducted, he felt increasingly isolated and bitter. His closest colleagues avoided him, fearing association with the scandal. Jack, sitting alone in the break room, ruminated on the events that had brought him to this point. His mind kept returning to the moment of the stop, reliving every decision, every word spoken. Shame and anger mixed in his chest, creating a toxic cocktail of emotions. It was at this moment that Sarah, a young officer of Middle Eastern descent recently out of the police academy, entered the room. She hesitated for a moment upon seeing Jack, but then decided to approach. "Officer Thompson," she said, her voice calm but firm, "may I speak with you for a moment?" Jack looked at her, surprised by her approach. "What do you want?" he replied, his voice laden with bitterness. Sarah sat across from him. "I want to understand," she said simply. "I want to understand what was going through your head that day, not to judge, but to understand." The sincerity in her voice caught Jack off guard. For a moment, his defensive posture wavered. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered. "Try to explain it to me," Sarah gently insisted. What followed was a difficult and emotionally charged conversation. Jack, for the first time, found himself confronted with his own prejudices, his past experiences, and the fears that had led him to act so impulsively and harmfully. Meanwhile, back in the conference room, Marcus had finally managed to calm the heated spirits. "I understand that changes are difficult," he concluded, "but they are necessary. We're not just changing procedures, we're changing mindsets, and it starts here, now, with each of us." By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the road ahead would be difficult. Marcus had established his commitment to change, but he would face significant resistance from certain sectors of the police force. As the officers left the room, Marcus noticed a small but vocal group of supporters. Among them was Lieutenant Lisa Chen, a respected veteran who approached him. "Commissioner," she said, "I want you to know that you have my full support. It's about time someone had the courage to face these issues head-on." Marcus nodded, grateful for the support, but aware that the real challenges were yet to come. The transformation he sought would not happen overnight, and every step towards change would be fiercely contested. Meanwhile, on the streets of New York, news of the incident and the proposed changes began to spread, sparking passionate debates among citizens. The entire city seemed to be on the brink of a significant transformation, with the NYPD at the heart of the storm. As night fell over the city that never sleeps, the stage was set for a battle that would test the resolve of Marcus Johnson and potentially reshape the future of policing in America's largest city. The coming days would determine whether the NYPD could truly change, or if old habits would prove too entrenched to overcome. As tension at the NYPD headquarters intensified, the ripple effects of the incident spread through New York City like waves in a pond. Eager journalists circled the headquarters, while on social media, the video of Jack's confrontation with Marcus went viral, generating passionate debates and dividing opinions. In the midst of this whirlwind, an unexpected subplot began to develop. Emily Rodriguez, a young and ambitious reporter from the city's leading newspaper, saw in this affair a golden opportunity for her career. Through her sources within the police, she began to investigate not only the incident itself, but also Jack Thompson's entire history and the policies of the institution. Emily discovered that Jack had a history of complaints about aggressive stops, particularly against minorities. But these complaints were often stifled or ignored. She also began to profile Marcus Johnson, revealing his impressive background and the challenges he had faced as a black man climbing the ranks of the police hierarchy. Meanwhile, at the headquarters, Lieutenant Lisa Chen, Marcus's ally, was facing her own battle. She began receiving veiled threats from colleagues who opposed the proposed changes. One day, arriving at her car after her shift, she found an anonymous message. "Be careful which side you choose. Some things are better left as they are." Pressure was also mounting on Robert Sullivan, the freshly retired commissioner. Many blamed him for not addressing discrimination issues during his tenure. Robert, tormented by guilt and the desire to do right, decided to contact Marcus to offer his support and knowledge of the internal complexities of the institution. In a discreet cafe in downtown Manhattan, Robert and Marcus met. "I know I made mistakes," Robert admitted, his voice laden with regret, "but I want to help make things right. I know all the skeletons in this institution's closet." Marcus listened carefully, aware that Robert's help could be crucial, but also conscious of the risks of associating too closely with the old regime. Meanwhile, Jack Thompson was struggling with his own inner demons. The conversations with Sarah, the young officer of Middle Eastern descent, had sown seeds of doubt in his mind about his beliefs and actions. One night, unable to sleep, he decided to visit his father, a retired police officer who had always been his role model. In the modest suburban New York home, Jack confided in his father about everything that was happening. To his surprise, instead of the unconditional support he expected, his father listened in silence for a long moment before speaking. "Son," he finally said, "maybe it's time to admit that the way we've done things hasn't always been right. Maybe it's time for a change." These words struck Jack like lightning, forcing him to question everything he believed in. Back at the headquarters, Marcus was facing a new challenge. A group of officers, led by Captain Frank Miller, was organizing active resistance to the new policies. They argued that the changes would compromise the effectiveness of the police force and put officers in danger. The tension reached its peak when Frank Miller called an unauthorized meeting with a large group of officers. We cannot allow poorly conceived policies to destroy everything we've worked for, he declared, his voice resonating in the crowded room. Marcus, informed of the meeting by Lieutenant Chen, knew he had to act quickly to prevent an open rebellion. He decided to confront the group directly, risking everything in a crucial moment. Meanwhile, on the streets, civil rights activist groups began to mobilize. Peaceful demonstrations in support of Marcus's reforms started to appear at key points in the city, increasing pressure on the NYPD. Reporter Emily Rodriguez, sensing she was on the verge of uncovering something important, intensified her investigations. She began receiving anonymous information about previous cases of police abuse that had been covered up, promising to expose a system much more deeply flawed than anyone imagined. As all these lines converged, it became clear that New York City was on the brink of a significant transformation. The case of Jack and Marcus had become the catalyst for a much broader confrontation between the old and the new, between resistance to change and the struggle for justice and equality. The coming days would be crucial. The decisions made and actions taken would not only shape the future of the NYPD, but could potentially set a precedent for police reform across the nation. The eyes of America were turning to New York, waiting to see if real change was possible. The sun rose tense over New York City. The streets around the NYPD headquarters were filled with protesters, some supporting Marcus's proposed reforms, others defending traditional policing. Local media intensely covered the event, with helicopters hovering overhead and journalists broadcasting live from every corner. Inside the headquarters, the air was charged with expectation. Marcus Johnson, dressed in his formal uniform, prepared to make a statement that could define the future of the institution. He knew his words would need to be carefully chosen to unite a deeply divided police force. Moments before Marcus left his office, Lieutenant Chen burst in urgently. "Commissioner, we have a problem," she said, her voice urgent. "Jack Thompson has disappeared. No one has seen him since last night." Marcus felt a chill down his spine. Jack's disappearance could trigger a series of unpredictable events. "Keep looking for him," he ordered, "but keep this confidential for now." Meanwhile, behind the scenes, reporter Emily Rodriguez received an anonymous call. "If you want the real story, come to the abandoned warehouse on 237 East Broadway in an hour," the mysterious voice said before hanging up. Emily, sensing she was on the verge of uncovering something important, grabbed her equipment and rushed out, leaving a cryptic message to her editor about a possible big reveal. At the headquarters, Marcus mounted the improvised podium in the main hall, surrounded by officers of all ranks. Television cameras were broadcasting live to the entire city. "Colleagues, citizens of New York," Marcus began, his voice firm, "we are at a defining moment in our history. Recent events have exposed deep wounds in our society and our institution, but they have also given us a unique opportunity for healing and transformation." As Marcus spoke, Jack Thompson was stealthily entering the abandoned warehouse. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. He carried a thick folder filled with documents. Back at the headquarters, Marcus continued, "We can no longer ignore the biases and injustices that have tarnished our reputation. It's time to confront our mistakes, learn from them, and commit to doing better." In the warehouse, Emily arrived, cautious but determined. She found Jack sitting on an old chair, the dim light of a single bulb illuminating his tormented face. "Officer Thompson?" Emily asked, surprised. Jack looked up. "Ms. Rodriguez, I have something you need to see." At the headquarters, Marcus was reaching the climax of his speech. "Starting today, we will implement fundamental changes in our procedures, our training, and our culture. It won't be easy, but it's necessary if we truly want to serve and protect all citizens." Meanwhile, in the warehouse, Jack was handing the folder to Emily. "This contains evidence of years of police misconduct, covered-up cases, falsified reports. I I was part of all this, but I can't live with this guilt anymore." Emily, shocked, began to flip through the documents. Her eyes widened with each turned page. This is explosive," she murmured. Back at the headquarters, Marcus concluded, "I ask each of you to join me on this journey of transformation. Together we can build a police force that is truly an example of justice, equality, and integrity." A momentary silence followed his words, abruptly broken by applause. It started with a few, but quickly spread, increasing in volume until the majority of those present were clapping. Even some of Marcus's fiercest critics seemed touched by his words. At that moment, Marcus's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Lieutenant Chen. "Jack found. He's with a reporter. Says he has evidence of widespread corruption." Marcus's heart raced. He knew that whatever Jack had revealed would change everything. The transformation he had promised was about to be much deeper and more painful than anyone could have imagined. Meanwhile, Emily, her hands shaking, began furiously typing on her laptop. The story she was about to publish would shake the foundations not only of the NYPD, but of the entire American law enforcement system. Jack, watching Emily work, felt a mix of relief and fear. He knew his life would never be the same again, but for the first time in a long time, he felt he was doing the right thing. As night fell over New York City, the events of this day converged to create a perfect storm of revelations, transformations, and unpredictable consequences. The tipping point had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. Marcus, realizing the magnitude of what was unfolding, knew he had to act fast. He ended his speech with a promise. "Whatever comes to light, we will face it head-on. This is our chance to rebuild trust, to redefine what it means to protect and serve. It starts now, with transparency and accountability." As he stepped down from the podium, the room buzzed with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The NYPD, and indeed the entire city of New York, stood on the brink of a transformation that would resonate far beyond its borders. The hours following Marcus's speech and Jack's explosive revelation were a whirlwind of activity in New York City. Emily Rodriguez's article exploded like a nuclear bomb in the media landscape, rapidly spreading across social media and dominating all television news broadcasts. The content of the documents Jack had handed over was devastating. It detailed years of systemic abuse, corruption cases involving high-ranking officials, and a consistent pattern of racial discrimination in police stops. The public's reaction was immediate and furious. Marcus Johnson, still at the headquarters, was quickly informed of the situation. He convened an emergency meeting with his closest team, including Lieutenant Chen and Robert Sullivan, the former commissioner who had offered to help. "This is bigger than we imagined," Marcus said, his voice grave. "We need to act fast and with total transparency." Meanwhile, in the streets, the news inflamed spirits. The demonstrations that were already taking place gained strength. Thousands of people converged on downtown Manhattan, demanding justice and immediate police reforms. Jack Thompson, now under protection in an undisclosed location, watched the events unfold on television. His face was a mixture of relief and apprehension. "I did what I had to do," he murmured to himself, "but at what cost?" At the headquarters, chaos ensued. Officers accused in the documents were suspended from duty, while others, fearing involvement, began to point fingers and make accusations. Captain Frank Miller, one of the main opponents of Marcus's reforms, was among the first to be taken in for questioning. Marcus, realizing the situation could quickly spiral out of control, decided to make another public statement. This time, he chose to do it on the steps of the headquarters, directly facing the crowd that had gathered in the streets. "Citizens of New York," he began, his voice amplified by speakers, "today's revelations are shocking and painful, but they represent a unique opportunity for real and lasting change." As Marcus spoke, reporter Emily Rodriguez, now at the center of attention, was receiving calls from international media. Her story had crossed American borders, drawing global attention to the situation in New York. At City Hall, the mayor and his team were holding emergency meetings. The pressure to act was enormous, and heated discussions about possible state intervention in the NYPD began to emerge. Back on the streets, the atmosphere was tense but charged with a strange hope. Protesters from different groups, some traditionally opposed, began to dialogue, united by shared outrage and the desire for change. Marcus continued his speech. "I promise you total transparency in this process. Every accusation will be investigated. Every guilty party will be held accountable, regardless of their position or influence." His words were met with applause and shouts of support from the crowd. For many, Marcus was becoming the symbol of the change they had long been waiting for. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, a support network began to form around Jack Thompson. Civil rights activists, lawyers, and even some honest police officers offered to protect him and ensure his testimony would be heard in its entirety. As night fell, the city of New York seemed to be on the brink of a profound transformation. On social media, hashtags like #CleanNYPD and Justice for All became global trending topics. Marcus, exhausted but determined, returned to his office after the speech. He knew the coming days would be crucial. The foundations of the institution he had sworn to lead were shaken, but for the first time, there was a real chance to rebuild it on stronger and fairer foundations. In a discreet apartment in a New York suburb, Jack Thompson looked out the window, observing the city lights. He knew his life would never be the same again, but for the first time in a long time, he felt he was on the right side of history. As dawn approached, Marcus received an unexpected call. It was the mayor of New York. "Commissioner," the mayor said, his voice tense, "the governor is considering putting the NYPD under state control. We need to act fast to show we can handle this internally." Marcus felt the weight of the entire city on his shoulders. He knew that the next few hours would determine not just the future of the NYPD, but potentially the future of policing across America. In newsrooms across the city, journalists worked through the night, digging deeper into the story. Social media was ablaze with debates, personal accounts of police misconduct, and calls for action. As a new day dawned on New York City, its residents woke up to a changed world. The city that never sleeps had been shaken to its core, and the tremors were only beginning. The stage was set for a battle that would test the resolve of every New Yorker and potentially reshape the future of law enforcement in America. In the weeks following the explosive revelations, New York City experienced a period of intense transformation. The city, once divided, was now uniting around a common goal: to completely reform the public safety system. Marcus Johnson, now seen as the catalyst for this change, faced his greatest challenge yet. He was no longer just a commissioner trying to implement new policies. He had become the symbol of a revolution within the police force. One morning, as he prepared for another intense workday, Marcus reflected on his journey. He remembered the idealistic young cadet he once was, and how those ideals had been tested and forged in the furnaces of reality. Now, he had the chance to make the difference he had always dreamed of. "I can't fail," he murmured to himself, adjusting his uniform in the mirror. "Not just for me, but for all those who have placed their trust in me." Meanwhile, Jack Thompson was facing his own journey of redemption. After weeks of depositions and cooperation with investigations, he finally had the opportunity to confront his former colleagues and superiors at a public hearing. Standing before the investigative commission, Jack took a deep breath before beginning his testimony. "I come here today not only to expose past mistakes, but to take responsibility for my part," he said, his voice firm despite his evident nervousness. "My journey of change began with a terrible mistake, but I hope it can end by contributing to a better future." As Jack detailed years of police misconduct, including his own actions, the room fell into dead silence. For many of those present, including some of his former colleagues. It was the first time they saw Jack not as an uncompromising cop, but as a man grappling with the weight of his own faults and prejudices. At the headquarters, Lieutenant Chen was leading efforts to implement the new diversity training and de-escalation techniques program. She faced resistance from some older officers, but to her surprise, many young recruits were embracing the initiative enthusiastically. "We're here to serve and protect all citizens," she constantly reminded her team. "We can't do that effectively if we don't understand and respect the differences in our community." Emily Rodriguez, the journalist who had exposed the scandal, continued her tireless work. She now focused on positive stories of change within the police force, highlighting officers who were making a difference in their communities. In one of her reports, Emily interviewed a young officer of Middle Eastern descent who had been inspired by the recent changes. "When I entered the academy, I was afraid I wouldn't fit in," he told her. "Now I feel like I can make a difference, that I can be a role model for my community." Robert Sullivan, the former commissioner, found a new purpose as a consultant for the Police Reform Commission. His experience and inside knowledge proved invaluable in navigating the bureaucratic and political complexities of the institution. "I spent years maintaining the status quo," Robert admitted during a meeting. "Now I have the chance to correct some of the mistakes I allowed to happen under my watch." As weeks turned into months, real changes began to take shape. New stop and frisk policies were put in place, body cameras became mandatory, and an independent oversight system was established. Marcus, observing the first positive results, felt a mixture of pride and humility. "We still have a long way to go," he told his team during a meeting. "But every step we take in the right direction is a victory." Jack Thompson, after completing his testimony and serving a reduced sentence for his cooperation, decided to dedicate his life to reforming the prison system. He began working with former inmates, helping them reintegrate into society. "I've known the system from both sides now," Jack explained in an interview. "And I know that true justice doesn't just lie in punishment, but in rehabilitation and second chances." The city of New York, though still facing challenges, began to see a gradual but significant change in its relationship with the police. Incidents of police abuse decreased, while community trust in law enforcement began to slowly grow. One sunny Sunday, months after the beginning of all this turmoil, Marcus was walking through a city park. He observed families enjoying the day, children playing, and noticed something that filled him with hope. A diverse group of young people chatting animatedly with two patrol officers. At that moment, Marcus felt that, despite all the challenges still ahead, real change was happening. The journey of overcoming and growth, both personal and institutional, was far from over, but every small progress was a victory to be celebrated. As he continued his walk, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Lieutenant Chen. "Commissioner, you need to see this. Something big is happening." The path of change, it seemed, was about to face its next big challenge. The rising sun painted New York's sky in shades of orange and pink as the city awakened to what promised to be a historic day. It had been exactly 1 year since the incident between Jack Thompson and Marcus Johnson had triggered a series of events that had profoundly transformed the NYPD and New York society. Marcus Johnson woke up early, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Today, he was going to present to the public and authorities the final report on the reforms implemented in the New York Police Department. The document not only detailed the changes made, but also presented concrete data on the reduction of police abuse incidents and the increase in public trust in the police force. As he prepared, Marcus received a message from Lieutenant Chen. "We're ready, Chief. The team is in place and the data has been triple-checked. We're going to make history today." At the same time, in a television studio in downtown Manhattan, Emily Rodriguez was preparing for the live broadcast that would cover the event. She had spent the last year meticulously documenting every step of the reform process, and today her work would culminate in a special report. "Sound check, Emily," called the technician. "1, 2, 3, she responded, adjusting her microphone. "Today, New York will see the result of a year's struggle for justice and change." Meanwhile, in a rehabilitation center in the suburbs of New York, Jack Thompson was getting ready to watch the broadcast. He had been invited to be present at the event, but had chosen to follow it remotely. His work with former inmates kept him busy, and he felt that his presence might distract from what really mattered, the changes implemented. "You're not going, Jack?" asked one of his colleagues. Jack shook his head. "My role in this story is over. Today is about the future, not the past." In downtown Manhattan, a crowd began to form in front of the building of the Department of the Interior, where the event would take place. Activists, journalists, police officers, and ordinary citizens mingled, all eager to hear what Marcus had to say. Robert Sullivan, the former commissioner, arrived early, determined to show his support. He had spent the past year working behind the scenes, using his experience to help navigate the complex bureaucratic tangles that often delayed reforms. "It's a new day for New York," he murmured to himself, watching the crowd grow. Inside the building, the tension was palpable. Staff rushed about, checking last-minute details. Marcus reviewed his notes one last time, aware that his words could define the future of public safety not only in New York, but potentially throughout the United States. "Mr. Commissioner," an assistant called. "It's time." Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath. He knew that despite all the progress made, there were still those who resisted the changes. Rumors of a possible protest against the reforms had been circulating, and security for the event had been reinforced. Meanwhile, in the surrounding streets, groups of protesters began to form. On one side, reform supporters carried signs celebrating the changes. On the other, a smaller but vocal group of opponents chanted slogans against what they called weakening the police. Lieutenant Chen, responsible for the event's security, closely monitored the situation. "Stay calm and remember your training," she instructed her team over the radio. "Today is the day to show that change is possible." As the time of the event approached, the energy in the city was electric. Everyone felt they were on the brink of something significant, a moment that could define the future of public safety in the country. Marcus cast one last glance at his reflection, adjusting his uniform. He thought about his journey, the lives affected, the battles fought. "It's time," he told himself, heading for the door. Meanwhile, in thousands of homes across New York, families gathered in front of their televisions. On the streets, people stopped to watch the giant screens set up in public squares. The entire city seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the moment when Marcus Johnson would take the stage to present the future of the New York Police Department. The stage was set for a final confrontation between the old and the new, between resistance to change and progress. The culmination of a year of transformations was about to begin. The auditorium at the Department of the Interior was packed, the atmosphere charged with expectations. Television cameras were strategically positioned, ready to broadcast live across the country. Marcus Johnson, taking a deep breath, stepped onto the stage to a thunderous applause. "Citizens of New York, distinguished authorities, members of the press," Marcus began, his firm voice resonating through the microphone. "1 year ago, our city faced a crisis that exposed the deep flaws in our public safety system. Today, I'm here to report on the changes we've implemented and the results we've achieved." As Marcus spoke, presenting data and graphs showing a significant reduction in police abuse cases and an increase in public trust, the tension in the auditorium was palpable. Many applauded enthusiastically, while others, mainly older officers, maintained skeptical expressions. Outside the building, the situation was becoming increasingly tense. The group of protesters opposed to the reforms had grown and was now dangerously approaching the main entrance. Lieutenant Chen, monitoring the situation, gave orders over the radio. "Hold the line, but don't escalate the situation. Remember your training." Back on stage, Marcus was reaching the crucial point of his presentation. But numbers are only part of the story, he said, his voice gaining intensity. The real change is in the lives we've touched, in the communities we've rebuilt, in the trust we've restored. At that moment, something unexpected happened. A man abruptly stood up in the audience, shouting, "This is all lies. You're destroying the police." The security service moved quickly to remove the man, but Marcus raised his hand, signaling them to stop. "No," he said calmly. "Let him speak. It's important that all voices are heard." The auditorium fell into stunned silence, shocked by Marcus's attitude. The man, momentarily taken aback, continued, "You're making the police weak, unable to do their job." Marcus, keeping his cool, responded, "I understand your concern. But let me ask you a question. What is strength to you? Is it the ability to intimidate, or is it the ability to protect and serve effectively?" As the debate unfolded in the auditorium, outside the situation was worsening. The protesters opposed to the reforms had begun to push against the barriers. Lieutenant Chen, seeing that the situation was about to spiral out of control, made a bold decision. She personally approached the leader of the protesters, removing her helmet. "Let's talk," she said, extending her hand. "Tell me your concerns." The gesture surprised everyone. Slowly, the tension began to dissipate, and an unlikely dialogue began right there on the street. Back in the auditorium, Marcus continued, "The real strength of the police lies in its connection with the community. When people trust us, they help us do our job. This doesn't weaken us, it strengthens us." His words seemed to touch something deep in the audience. Even some of the skeptics began to nod in agreement. At that moment, the doors of the auditorium opened, and Lieutenant Chen entered, accompanied by the leader of the protesters. "Commissioner," she called out, "I believe we have another voice that needs to be heard." Marcus, surprised but composed, nodded. "Please come up here," he invited the protester. The man, visibly nervous, stepped onto the stage. I still have doubts about these changes," he began, hesitating, "but I'm willing to listen and try to understand." It was at this moment that Marcus realized this was the true climax, not a confrontation, but a moment of connection and mutual understanding. "This is what we're looking for," said Marcus, placing his hand on the man's shoulder. "Not unanimity, but dialogue. Not blind conformity, but mutual understanding." The scene was captured by the cameras and broadcast live across the country. It was a powerful image. The police commissioner and a critic, side by side, engaged in respectful dialogue. Emily Rodriguez, commenting live, could barely contain her emotion. What we're witnessing here today is nothing less than a revolution in how we think about public safety and community. As the event drew to a close, Marcus made his final remarks. "The road ahead is still long, but today we've taken a crucial step. We've shown that it's possible to change, that it's possible to build a police force that is strong not through brute force, but through trust and respect from the community." Marcus's last words were met with a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. It was more than applause. It was the sound of a city embracing a new era of community policing and social justice. As he left the stage, Marcus knew this wasn't the end, but only the beginning of an even more difficult journey. But for the first time in a long time, he felt genuine hope for the future of New York and America. In the weeks following the historic event at the Department of the Interior, New York City experienced a palpable transformation. The open dialogue initiated by Marcus Johnson had paved the way for a new era of collaboration between the police and the community. The streets of the city, once the theater of tension and mistrust, were now witnessing scenes that few would have imagined possible a year ago. Police officers actively participated in community events, not just as security forces, but as full members of the community. Young people who previously avoided all contact with the police now approached to talk and even consider careers in law enforcement. Jack Thompson, observing these changes from his rehabilitation center, felt a mixture of pride and remorse. His act of courage in exposing years of misconduct had been the catalyst for this transformation. He decided to use his experience to launch a mentorship program, connecting former police officers with at-risk youth, seeking to break the cycle of mistrust and violence. Lieutenant Chen, now recognized as one of the main architects of police reform, was invited to lead workshops in other American cities. Her approach to dialogue and de-escalation became a model for police forces across the country. Emily Rodriguez, the journalist who had documented the entire journey, published a book detailing the transformation of the New York Police Department. The book quickly became a bestseller, inspiring debates on police reform worldwide. Marcus Johnson, though satisfied with the progress made, knew that the work was far from over. He implemented a system of continuous evaluation and community feedback, ensuring that the police remained responsive and adaptable to the changing needs of the city. One day, as he walked through a neighborhood once known for its high crime rates, Marcus was approached by an elderly woman. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "For the first time in decades, I'm not afraid to go out at night." This simple moment, more than any statistic or report, showed Marcus the real impact of his work. New York's transformation did not go unnoticed internationally. Delegations from other countries began to visit the city to study the police reform model. The New York model, as it came to be called, began to be adapted and implemented in other major metropolises around the world. However, not everything was perfect. There was still resistance and challenges. Some older officers took early retirement, unable to adapt to the changes. Isolated incidents still occurred, but they were now dealt with transparently and swiftly. As the sun set on the city, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey they had accomplished. The incident that had nearly destroyed his career had transformed into an opportunity to create lasting change. New York, once a symbol of division and inequality, was now becoming a beacon of hope and a model of how a community can come together to create a fairer and safer future for all. 5 years later, Marcus Johnson walked the streets of New York, now a simple citizen after his retirement. The city he had helped transform continued to evolve. Young police officers, trained under the new system, patrolled the streets with respect and empathy. Jack Thompson now led a national police reform program. Lieutenant Chen had become the new police commissioner, continuing the legacy of change. As he observed the friendly interaction between a police officer and a group of teenagers, Marcus smiled. The seed they had planted had blossomed, but he knew that the work to maintain and nurture this change was continuous and eternal. Dear viewer, you have just witnessed an incredible journey of transformation and hope. The story of Marcus, Jack, and all those involved in changing the New York Police Department shows us that real change is possible, even in the face of the greatest challenges. What do you think? How can we apply these lessons in our own communities? If you've watched this far, comment, "I watched until the end," and share your thoughts. Don't forget to click on the video appearing on the end screen for more inspiring stories like this one. Together, we can make a difference.